It started like any other summer night, crowds streaming into Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, Massachusetts, buzzing with excitement for Coldplay's highly anticipated concert. Couples held hands, parents hoisted their kids on their shoulders, and cell phones were already out, ready to capture moments they hoped would become lifelong memories. For most, it would be a night of music and unity. But for two specific concertgoers, it would ignite a scandal that would burn through the walls of one of Silicon Valley's most respected tech companies and drag deeply personal secrets into public daylight. What unfolded on that stage didn't just change the course of a concert. It changed the life of a CEO, exposed hidden power dynamics, and called into question everything we thought we knew about leadership, integrity, and the face of modern workplace culture. He was just another face in the crowd that night. Andy Byron, 50 years old, the quiet but commanding CEO of Astronomer, had always maintained a low-key public presence. His company wasn't flashy like Google or Tesla, but those in the know understood its influence. Astronomer specialized in managing massive data pipelines, essential for organizations needing to scale data analysis in real time. In Silicon Valley, Astronomer was considered one of the unsung heroes of the cloud age, quietly raising millions in venture capital, partnering with industry giants, and placing its bets on data automation before it became trendy. And at the center of it all was Byron, seen as a brainy, no-drama figure who often praised his team and deflected attention away from himself. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. So when that kiss cam moment hit the big screen above the Coldplay stage, no one in the audience could have imagined the chain of events about to be unleashed. It was an innocent moment, at first. The stadium cameras had panned across the crowd in search of adorable couples, newlyweds, and teary-eyed fans clinging to each other as the lights dimmed. Then, it landed on them. A middle-aged man with silvering hair and a woman with auburn curls. They looked startled, even frozen. She gasped and covered her face, trying to disappear. He ducked downward, hiding his head between her shoulder and the seat. The crowd laughed gently, until frontman Chris Martin's voice cut through the stadium speakers with a jarring and unscripted remark. "Oh, look at these two. All right, come on, you're okay." Oh, what? Either they're having an affair, or they're just very shy. It was a throwaway joke. A cheeky, spontaneous line meant to get a chuckle from the crowd. Martin likely had no idea what he had just ignited. Within hours, TikTok users began uploading the moment from various angles. Then came the freeze frames. Then the pixel peeping. It didn't take long for amateur sleuths to put names to the faces. The man was unmistakably Andy Byron. The woman? Kristen Cabot, Astronomer's head of human resources. She had been at the company almost as long as he had. For insiders, their working relationship had always been close. But now, a kiss cam, a ducked head, and a viral joke had laid their proximity bare for the world to dissect. The virality was immediate and ruthless. Reddit threads exploded with speculation. LinkedIn was awash with screenshots and reactions. A viral TikTok with nearly 3 million views asked bluntly, "Is this the CEO of Astronomer cheating with his head of HR at a Coldplay concert?" The comments were relentless. How do you return to work after this? If she's HR, who does she report this scandal to? So this is what remote-first culture really means. But this wasn't just tabloid fodder. This was the beginning of a larger story. Because as the internet debated the ethics of workplace romances and the power dynamics they carry, a deeper, more unsettling question began to take form. Was Kristen Cabot the only one? Days later, when Byron finally emerged from silence, the world wasn't prepared for what he would say. At first, his tone was corporate, measured, predictable. He expressed regret, called the moment deeply personal, and insisted on maintaining a culture of respect. But in a leaked internal town hall clip, captured from a staff member's screen recording, Byron was heard muttering a sentence under his breath that would take the scandal from a messy workplace rumor to a corporate earthquake. She wasn't the only one. With those 5 words, the entire house of cards began to wobble. Because suddenly, this wasn't a story about a single indiscretion. It became a story of patterns, a story of secrets, a story of women who began coming forward anonymously with stories of inappropriate conversations, promotions that felt more like favors, and quiet resignations that never made headlines, but were quietly whispered about at Friday happy hours and in private Signal group chats. This video is not just about a kiss. It's about how one moment captured on camera exposed a decade-long undercurrent of corporate intimacy and control. It's about how a revered CEO, celebrated for building one of the most respected back-end tech infrastructures in the business, may have also built something much more dangerous. A workplace culture built on blurred lines and quiet complicity. It's about how HR, the very department meant to protect employees, may have been more entangled than anyone realized. Over the next chapters, we will walk you through this story in full. From the founding of Astronomer and Byron's carefully curated leadership brand, to the Coldplay concert that blew it all open, to the women whose stories had never been heard until now. You'll see how internal documents, board-level panic, and a growing shareholder revolt transformed a single public moment into a full-blown corporate reckoning. This is the story of a man who thought he could control the narrative, and the moment he couldn't anymore. But perhaps more importantly, this is the story of a system that enabled it all to go unnoticed, until one stadium spotlight forced the truth out into the open. And you might be wondering, what happened to Kristen Cabot after all this? Why did she vanish so quickly after the kiss cam moment went viral? Did the company quietly pay her off? Did she resign? Was she fired? You might also be wondering about Andy Byron's marriage. What did his wife know, and when did she find out? How has this affected their family? And what does his cryptic, "She wasn't the only one," really mean? Were there more women? Were there cover-ups? As we'll uncover, the answer to all of those questions is not simple. But one thing is certain. The moment the camera found Andy Byron and Kristen Cabot, it didn't just capture a kiss. It captured a crack in the armor of corporate reputation. And through that crack, a flood of truths began to pour out. By the end of this expose, you'll have the full story, one that involves ambition, power, betrayal, loyalty, and a modern corporate culture caught off guard by its own hypocrisy. But we're only just getting started. Before the Coldplay concert, few outside the data tech world had ever heard of Andy Byron. He was not a household name, nor a typical media darling. He didn't command attention in tech conferences the way Elon Musk or Mark Benioff did, and he rarely gave interviews. But those who worked with him described him as sharp, strategic, and oddly enigmatic. Byron was the kind of leader who operated like an algorithm, precise, methodical, nearly unreadable. His success wasn't built on charisma, it was built on consistency. He showed up, did the job, kept his inner circle tight, and built a company that earned respect through sheer technical dominance. For the board and investors, he was a safe bet. Dependable, predictable, until he wasn't. His personal life had long been a fortress. Married for over 20 years, 2 grown children, a modest house outside Palo Alto, no flashy cars, no dramatic Instagram presence. He was, by all accounts, the embodiment of professional discretion, which is why the kiss cam moment was so profoundly jarring. It wasn't just out of character. It was an open rupture in the carefully stitched fabric of his life. The camera didn't just catch a romantic moment. It exposed a contradiction. A man who built his reputation on logic and discipline now appeared on giant screens wrapped around a woman who was not his wife. And that woman was not a stranger. She was his colleague, his subordinate, the head of HR, the one person responsible for enforcing policies he was now suspected of breaking. The implications were enormous. Overnight, what began as internet gossip mutated into a legitimate crisis. Within 48 hours, Astronomer's PR department had been flooded with media requests. Reporters camped out near their Mountain View office. Internal employee forums lit up with confusion, then outrage. Some staffers defended Byron, insisting it was a private matter. Others pointed out the glaring conflict of interest, the ethical breach, the unspoken rules suddenly shattered. A Slack message leaked within the company showed employees openly questioning whether the firm's leadership could be trusted. One anonymous message read, "If HR can't hold him accountable, who will? And if they were in on it together, then what hope is there for the rest of us?" Astronomer's board went into emergency meetings. Investors began whispering behind closed doors. Journalists started digging. And it wasn't long before whispers turned into findings. One former employee, a former executive assistant who had left the company abruptly in 2020, agreed to speak off the record. Her comments were vague but pointed. Let's just say Kristen wasn't the first person to get unusually close to Andy. She's just the one who got caught in 4K. Then came another, and another. Different voices, similar themes. A pattern began to emerge, not just of one questionable relationship, but a series of interactions over time that, when viewed together, painted a deeply uncomfortable picture. What made the scandal so uniquely volatile wasn't just the relationship itself, it was the structure around it. In most corporate scandals involving executives and inappropriate relationships, the blame can be diluted across departments. But when the CEO is allegedly involved with the very person in charge of human resources, there is no room for plausible deniability. HR is supposed to be the firewall, the mechanism by which employee concerns are processed and handled fairly. If the person running that department is entangled with the most powerful person in the company, that firewall collapses. Employees began to question whether past complaints had been buried, whether promotions were earned or gifted, and whether anyone who had spoken up in the past had been silenced. A software engineer who had left Astronomer 2 years prior posted anonymously on Medium, describing a culture where some people floated to the top for no clear reason, and where loyalty to certain personalities mattered more than performance. While the post didn't name names, it included subtle allusions that many interpreted as references to Kristen and Andy. The tension reached a boiling point when a second video surfaced. This time from within the company. It was a shaky clip from a virtual town hall held 3 days after the concert incident. Byron, visibly tense, delivered a pre-written statement acknowledging the public attention. He described the moment as misinterpreted and said, "What was captured on camera was a personal interaction during a private moment, and I take full responsibility for the discomfort this may have caused." But then, as the feed continued and he answered a handful of carefully screened questions, he seemed to go off script. In a moment of visible strain, perhaps caught up in emotion or fatigue, Byron muttered under his breath, barely audible, but captured clearly enough on the recording. "She wasn't the only one." That sentence, those 5 words, were the spark. Screenshots of the quote spread instantly. TikTok creators dissected it in real time. Was it a confession? A slip? A threat? A deflection? News outlets picked it up, each with a different spin. But one thing was clear. This was no longer about one incident. It was about many. And the story was no longer just personal. It was institutional. Byron's silence after that remark only deepened the mystery. He disappeared from public view. Kristen Cabot, too, went dark. Her company email was deactivated. Her LinkedIn profile was taken down. No official explanation was offered. Just silence. And in that silence, speculation rushed to fill the void. What deals were being made behind the scenes? Was a payout involved? Were NDAs signed? Or was the company trying to quietly contain a wider issue? At the heart of this storm lies a question that goes beyond one man, one woman, or one company. It's a question that cuts to the core of modern workplace dynamics. How much power is too much power? When does influence become manipulation? And how do we hold leaders accountable when the systems designed to enforce that accountability are themselves compromised? This exposé doesn't aim to sensationalize. It aims to reveal, to examine the hidden layers beneath a scandal that started on a stadium screen but quickly revealed the rot within a respected institution. We'll bring you the timelines, the testimonials, the documents, and the human cost behind the headlines. You'll hear from those who worked under Byron, those who suspected something long before the kiss cam, and those who are now stepping forward for the first time. This is not just a story of betrayal. It's a story of reckoning. The camera didn't lie, but the silence that followed it did. And now, for the first time, that silence is being broken. To truly understand the weight of what the Coldplay concert exposed, we first need to understand the ecosystem that allowed Andy Byron to rise. Astronomer wasn't born in the limelight, nor did it seek the attention most tech startups crave. It wasn't chasing headlines with sleek gadgets or moonshot ventures. Its success was rooted in the shadows, data infrastructure, the kind of work that makes the digital world function smoothly while most people remain unaware of its existence. And for Andy Byron, that obscurity was a gift. Astronomer's origin story begins in the mid-2010s, amid the explosion of big data and cloud adoption. Every tech company, from startups to Fortune 500s, suddenly found themselves drowning in data. Logs, metrics, events, customer behavior, telemetry, information was coming in faster than ever before. But raw data, on its own, is useless without organization. That's where pipelines came in. These digital highways move data from point A to point B, cleansing, transforming, and organizing it for analysis. Astronomers specialized in this unseen plumbing of the internet, and it did so with a powerful tool, Apache Airflow. Airflow itself was not Byron's invention. It was developed inside Airbnb to manage workflows at scale, then open-sourced for the community. But Byron, then working as a senior architect at a different data company, saw what others didn't. He understood that while Airflow was growing in popularity among engineers, it lacked the enterprise polish that big businesses demanded. It was raw, unstable, and fragmented. Byron envisioned a platform that could bring order to this chaos. With a handful of investors and a vision sharp as glass, he co-founded Astronomer with a focus on making Airflow enterprise-ready. At first, few paid attention. The company's early years were marked by relentless engineering sprints, hackathons, and behind-the-scenes integrations. Their office in Cincinnati, Ohio, not exactly the epicenter of tech innovation, hummed quietly, removed from the buzz of Silicon Valley. But this distance from the spotlight was part of Byron's strategy. While other startups chased press, Astronomer chased partnerships with Microsoft, AWS, and Google Cloud. While flashy founders were launching rockets, Byron was meeting CTOs in quiet conference rooms, showing them how Astronomer could cut their data processing costs in half. Investors started to take notice. Sequoia, one of the most respected VC firms in tech, led a major funding round in 2020. Suddenly, Astronomer wasn't just a scrappy startup, it was a real contender. Analysts started writing pieces about the invisible infrastructure boom. Tech blogs began calling Astronomer the most important company you've never heard of. And through it all, Andy Byron remained calm, collected, and visibly uninterested in becoming the story. His leadership style was often described as hands-on from a distance. He trusted his technical leads, delegated to product managers, and showed up only when things were truly on fire. But when he did show up, people listened. Inside the company, Byron was revered, though not particularly loved. He wasn't a warm leader. He wasn't the type to remember your birthday or offer praise in meetings. But he had a reputation for getting things done. In sprint reviews, he was brutal but fair. "This doesn't solve the problem," was one of his favorite phrases. He pushed people hard, sometimes too hard, but most employees chalked it up to the pressure cooker of startup life. He wasn't the kind of CEO who went drinking with the team or held town halls with motivational speeches. He stayed in his office, met with execs, and vanished to investor meetings like a ghost. Still, his vision was clear. And that vision drew in some of the brightest minds in the data infrastructure space. One of those minds was Kristen Cabot. Kristen joined Astronomer around 2017, just as the company was preparing to scale. Her background was in people operations at a major healthcare tech firm. She had a reputation for balancing empathy with strategy, a rare trait in HR leadership. What drew attention early on was how quickly she rose. In under a year, she was promoted to head of HR. Colleagues noted her close working relationship with Byron, though no one dared question it directly. "She was good at her job," said one former team member. But there was always this unspoken understanding that she had a direct line to the top. You didn't cross Kristen, not because she was scary, but because you knew she was protected. Protected. That was a word that would resurface later in troubling contexts. But back then, it was spoken with admiration, even envy. Cabot became a fixture of Astronomer's culture initiatives, diversity reports, remote work policy rollouts, and internal mentoring programs. She helped shape the company's public image as a forward-thinking, values-driven organization. For a company built in the shadows of infrastructure, Kristen gave it a human face. Together, Byron and Cabot formed what many saw as a power duo. They didn't advertise their connection. There were no romantic rumors in the early days. But their synergy was undeniable. Byron spoke in bullet points. Kristen translated those bullets into feelings. He set the pace. She managed the people behind the pace. If he was the brain of the company, she was the bloodstream. And in a high-growth environment, that kind of alliance was invaluable. From 2019 to 2022, Astronomer exploded in size. Employee count quadrupled. Customer contracts surged, They hosted their first developer conference, launched a SaaS version of Airflow, and began preparing for a potential IPO. Internally, the atmosphere was intense. Burnout was common, but so were promotions. Bonuses were generous. Stock options made millionaires out of engineers who had joined early. The pressure was unrelenting. And at the center of it all was Andy Byron, untouchable, brilliant, tightly controlled. That's what made the Coldplay kiss so destabilizing. Because for a man who had spent his career avoiding chaos, that moment was pure disorder. It was public. It was emotional. It was sloppy. And it hinted at something much more dangerous than poor judgment. It hinted at hypocrisy. How could the man who demanded discipline from his teams fail to maintain his own? How could the leader who scolded product managers for missing deadlines be making private decisions that could legally endanger his company's HR integrity? And what did it say about Astronomer that no one saw or admitted to seeing this coming? Because the truth was, some people had seen it. They had noticed the way Cabot's team avoided challenging Byron's policies, the way performance reviews for certain staff felt one-sided, the way complaints were sometimes acknowledged and then vanished from discussion. But these things were hard to prove. They lived in tone, in subtext, in the shadowy space between HR protocol and executive preference. And in the breakneck pace of startup life, most people just looked the other way, until the kiss cam forced everyone to look. Following the Coldplay incident, the scrutiny on Astronomer's inner structure didn't just focus on the moment itself. It zeroed in on the culture that had protected Byron for so long. What started as a kiss became a magnifying glass, exposing every crack in the organization's foundation. People began revisiting decisions that once seemed innocuous, promotions that happened abruptly without public job postings, internal transfers that occurred without full transparency. Even the way Astronomer handled layoffs during the pandemic came under renewed analysis. In 2020, when the company downsized a portion of its onboarding and support teams, some employees questioned whether the decisions were entirely performance-based. At the time, they had no proof, just instincts and whispers. But after the kiss cam video, those suspicions turned into public inquiry. Former employees who had stayed silent began to talk. They reached out to journalists, to whistleblower hotlines, and in some cases, to each other. One ex-engineer anonymously described a moment in 2019 when he walked in on Byron and Cabot in a conference room with the lights dimmed. "I thought it was weird," he said. "They weren't doing anything inappropriate at that moment, but the energy in the room changed the second I stepped in. It was like I had walked into something sacred that I wasn't supposed to see." Another former product manager recalled being reprimanded after pushing back on a hiring decision that Cabot approved with Byron's blessing. "The person we brought in didn't have the qualifications," she explained. "I said as much. The next week, I was told I was being repositioned. And that was it for me." Patterns, quiet shifts, muted voices. These weren't isolated stories. They were echoes of a system that had, for years, discouraged transparency while masquerading as a meritocracy. Part of what made Astronomer so successful was its branding as a company that trusted its talent. The phrase was used repeatedly in all-hands meetings and promotional materials. "We don't micromanage," Byron would often say. "We hire the best and let them lead." On the surface, this philosophy sounded empowering. But in reality, it created an atmosphere where certain decisions were made without oversight, where certain relationships were exempt from criticism, and where power accumulated around the CEO and his closest confidants, unquestioned. The company's remote-first culture, implemented aggressively after 2020, only added another layer of concealment. With employees spread across time zones, working through Slack and Zoom, personal relationships became easier to blur. Office dynamics became abstract. Leadership interactions could be disguised as operational efficiency, and within that fog, boundaries became porous. Yet, despite these problems, Astronomer continued to thrive. Revenue climbed. Partnership deals grew. Engineering talent still clamored to join. On paper, it was a dream. But inside, there was a tension no one dared name. A silent understanding that some rules didn't apply to everyone. And that silence stretched out for years, until a Coldplay concert in July changed everything. When the kiss cam footage went viral, employees were initially confused. Most of them didn't even recognize the couple at first. The angle was low resolution, the lighting poor, But it didn't take long for someone in engineering to say what many feared. That looks like Andy. The HR Slack channel was locked within hours. Emails went unanswered. One department lead attempted to initiate an internal inquiry, but was reportedly told to stand down until formal guidance is issued. That guidance never came. Instead, the company issued a vague statement acknowledging an ongoing review of recent public events and urging employees to remain focused on company objectives. The message was met with outrage. For many, it felt like a cover-up disguised as leadership. One employee, a data analyst who had only been with Astronomer for 6 months, said, "I joined because I believed in the mission. I thought this place was different. But after this, I don't know. It's like everyone is walking on eggshells, pretending nothing happened. But something had happened. Something undeniable. And its impact was about to reverberate beyond internal Slack messages and gossip threads. Investors began demanding answers. A major client, a healthcare analytics company, suspended its contract, citing governance concerns. VC firms who once praised Byron's leadership started making quiet calls to the board, asking whether this was a temporary embarrassment or a sign of something deeper. In response, Astronomer's board convened an emergency ethics committee, an internal group comprised of outside counsel, board members, and compliance officers. The committee was tasked with conducting an independent review of Byron's conduct, particularly his relationship with Cabot. But insiders knew the scope would have to go further. Because if Cabot wasn't the only one, who else might be involved? What other decisions had been compromised? What policies were ignored or rewritten to protect certain individuals? Meanwhile, a separate narrative began to take shape on social media, not just about Byron, but about tech culture itself. Coldplay's joke on stage had unintentionally triggered a broader debate about workplace relationships in an era where power dynamics are no longer considered private matters. A trending hashtag #PowerPlaysInTech, captured the anger. Critics weren't just calling for Byron's resignation, they were calling for a reckoning. They were asking why so many tech leaders, men in particular, continued to operate with impunity, protected by loyal HR departments, complacent boards, and cultures of silence. For the first time, Astronomer was no longer the invisible infrastructure company. It was front-page news. And through it all, Andy Byron said nothing. No apology, no denial, no statement clarifying his comment. She wasn't the only one, just silence. And in that silence, his reputation began to unravel. The man who built a company to manage the chaos of data was now the source of chaos. And as more voices emerged, as internal reports leaked, as public trust evaporated, one question loomed over Astronomer's glossy homepage. What happens when the system designed to organize data becomes a system that hides truth? To understand the magnitude of what unfolded after the Coldplay incident, one cannot ignore the second person in that stadium spotlight, Kristen Cabot. While Andy Byron was the executive face of Astronomer, Cabot had long been its internal anchor. She wasn't just the head of human resources. She was, in many ways, the invisible force that shaped the company's inner culture, navigating the ever-evolving complexities of people, power, and perception. Her rise through the ranks mirrored Astronomer's own ascension in the tech ecosystem, fast, calculated, and carefully managed. Kristen Cabot joined Astronomer in late 2016, roughly 2 years after the company's founding. At the time, the startup was still finding its footing. Employee count hovered around 25. There was no formal HR department, only a part-time recruiter and a generic employee handbook downloaded off a startup toolkit website. The founders, mostly engineers, knew they needed structure but lacked the time and expertise to build it. Byron, who by then was already positioning himself as the singular vision behind the company's expansion, understood the need for someone who could tame the chaos of growth. Cabot was hired with little fanfare, but those who worked with her early on remember her immediate impact. Within months, she had introduced onboarding protocols, drafted updated workplace policies, and established Astronomer's first diversity and inclusion framework. But beyond documents and training slides, what made Kristen effective was her intuition. She understood people, how to read them, how to handle them, how to guide or diffuse them when necessary. Employees started referring to her as the fixer, someone who could step into a conflict and have it resolved within hours, not weeks. But Kristen didn't just manage people, she managed perception. Unlike traditional HR leads who often kept a visible distance from executive leadership, Cabot was regularly seen walking into Byron's office. At first, the interactions were chalked up to standard leadership collaboration. But as time passed, their proximity became more noticeable. They were often the last two people to leave the office. They shared rides to off-site meetings. During company retreats, they were frequently spotted huddled together in quiet conversation. For some, these moments hinted at trust and alignment. For others, they raised questions that no one felt comfortable asking out loud. Cabot's ability to maintain professional control while navigating increasingly personal speculation was part of what made her so compelling and so untouchable. Her demeanor was calm, almost clinical. She rarely raised her voice, yet her presence commanded attention. She could sit through a heated meeting, remain silent for 30 minutes, then offer a single sentence that cut through the noise and changed the direction of the discussion. Her authority didn't come from volume. It came from certainty. It was that certainty that made her promotion to head of HR in early 2018 unsurprising to some and shocking to others. She leapfrogged more senior internal candidates, many of whom had broader team management experience. But the justification was clean. Cabot had built the infrastructure, demonstrated consistent excellence, and had the trust of the executive team. That last phrase, in particular, echoed across internal announcement emails and investor updates. She has the trust of the executive team. That trust came at a cost. Under Kristen's tenure, Astronomer rolled out policies that, on the surface, appeared progressive. Unlimited PTO, remote-first flexibility, a zero-tolerance harassment policy with anonymous reporting mechanisms. But beneath the veneer of innovation, something else began to fester. Complaints filed through the internal HR portal were acknowledged, but rarely acted upon. Performance improvement plans became tools of quiet offboarding. Employees who raised concerns about managerial favoritism found themselves assigned to less visible projects or invited to reconsider their alignment with company values. Several ex-employees, speaking anonymously, later described their time under Kristen's leadership as intellectually stimulating but psychologically draining. One former team lead in the product division explained, "Kristen was brilliant, no doubt. But there was always this sense that she knew more than you. And if she didn't like where your loyalty lay, she could make things very difficult, very quickly." Still, most kept quiet. Not because they were afraid, at least not at first, but because they believed in the mission. Astronomer was growing. The stock options were promising. The tech was solid. If Kristen and Byron seemed closely aligned, perhaps it was simply a high-functioning partnership. And in tech, blurred lines were everywhere. Who hasn't worked for a startup where the founder dated someone in marketing, or where the COO's brother ran procurement? The industry was rife with overlapping roles and relationships. But Cabot and Byron's dynamic was different. It wasn't just about visibility, it was about protection. More than a few employees noted that during times of internal turbulence, Kristen's authority seemed to expand beyond HR. She had influence over strategic hiring decisions outside her scope. She occasionally weighed in on product roadmap adjustments. One engineer claimed she blocked a leadership promotion for a colleague who had previously clashed with Byron in a budget meeting. When asked why, the explanation given was vague: cultural fit concerns. It was this blending of HR and executive privilege that ultimately positioned Cabot not as a neutral party, but as a power broker. And it was that reputation that made the Kisscam video so explosive. Because when it became clear that the woman beside Byron was Kristen, the implications went far beyond infidelity or personal embarrassment. It suggested something systematic. It suggested collusion. It suggested that the very person responsible for upholding workplace ethics had been engaged in a relationship that potentially violated every principle she had publicly championed. And the fallout was swift. Within 24 hours of the video going viral, Kristen's internal profiles began to vanish. Her Slack account was deactivated. Her email returned auto-replies. Employees received no official communication regarding her status. There was no statement, no HR-wide memo, no indication of whether she had resigned, been placed on leave, or been terminated. It was as if the woman who had shaped Astronomer's workplace from the inside had been erased overnight. Externally, the company remained silent. Reporters began circling. LinkedIn lit up with whispers. On Twitter, former employees began threading speculative timelines, pointing out when Cabot had suddenly appeared in key strategic meetings or when certain personnel decisions seemed to favor individuals close to her. One anonymous whistleblower submitted a timeline of promotion approvals tied to social outings and conference attendance patterns. Patterns that now, through a new lens, seemed less coincidental and more coordinated. And yet, Kristen did not speak. In an era where public figures rush to defend themselves, post medium apologies, or go on podcasts to reclaim their narratives, Cabot disappeared completely. No posts, no interviews, no statements, just silence. But the absence spoke volumes. It suggested fear, or shame, or perhaps something more strategic. An exit deal, a legal entanglement, a gag order. Because when someone so central to an organization disappears without a trace, it's rarely clean. It's often the result of negotiations, lawyers, and reputational triage. Those closest to her offered conflicting interpretations. One ex-coworker said, "She was destroyed by this. She didn't expect to get caught, and when she did, it crushed her." Another claimed, "She knew exactly what she was doing. She played the long game, and it worked, until it didn't." Regardless of the motive or mindset, one thing is certain. The kiss cam didn't just unmask a personal relationship. It unraveled a professional myth. Kristen Cabot was no longer just the HR whisperer. She was now the symbol of a system that blurred accountability with intimacy and paid the price when those two forces collided in public view. As the days passed and Astronomer's silence deepened, speculation surrounding Kristen Cabot grew more layered, more personal, and, most damningly, more credible. She had been the gatekeeper of trust, the embodiment of the company's people-first culture. And yet, there was now a glaring contradiction. The very systems she helped architect were unraveling under the weight of her own decisions. Employees who had once praised her discretion and poise were now questioning every meeting, every policy, every interaction. The human resources team, left without clear leadership, scrambled to process the emotional fallout. One junior HR analyst reported to a friend in a now-deleted social media post, "It feels like our backbone just snapped. She didn't just leave, she vanished. And we don't know if we're supposed to defend her or distance ourselves." Behind the scenes, the internal investigation launched by Astronomer's board began to pick up steam. External legal counsel was brought in to review not only the allegations surrounding Byron, but also Kristen's tenure and decision-making. Confidential exit interviews from the past 5 years were pulled for analysis. Specific attention was paid to cases where employee complaints had mysteriously gone cold after an initial flurry of interest. A former operations associate, who left in late 2021, spoke under condition of anonymity. "I had filed a complaint about a team lead making inappropriate comments during meetings. Kristen was warm, receptive. She told me she was taking it seriously. But a week later, I was pulled off my main project. 2 weeks after that, the guy got promoted. It didn't make sense back then. Now, it does." These were no longer isolated accounts. They were forming a mosaic of dysfunction. Kristen hadn't just influenced hiring or performance metrics. She had allegedly suppressed complaints, leveraged personal loyalty, and used her proximity to the CEO to consolidate power far beyond her job description. She wasn't just HR. She was the unofficial architect of the company's culture. And, in hindsight, it's blind spots. Yet, it's important to note that Kristen's rise didn't happen in a vacuum. The startup world thrives on blurred lines, on agility over bureaucracy. In this environment, those who can quickly handle chaos, speak the language of both code and culture, and deliver results without requiring constant oversight are not just appreciated, they're accelerated. Cabot thrived because she played the part perfectly. She was emotionally intelligent, highly efficient, and, at least externally, deeply aligned with Astronomer's values. But alignment in tech often comes with hidden compromises. In internal Slack channels, some remaining employees began debating whether Kristen's relationship with Byron, if it was indeed romantic and long-standing, had influenced the trajectory of entire teams. They combed through old internal newsletters and blog posts, searching for subtle signs they might have missed. One engineer pointed out a 2020 company update that congratulated Kristen for creating the backbone of our values-driven culture. In hindsight, he said, it reads like satire. More importantly, questions of legal liability began circling. If Byron and Cabot were in a consensual relationship, did it violate company policy? Was that policy enforced equally across the organization? Were there unreported benefits, promotions, or bonuses awarded due to their connection? Were performance reviews of executives influenced by that relationship? Lawyers representing former employees began circling. One filed a formal request for a reopening of a discrimination claim that had been previously dismissed by HR in 2021. The basis? That the dismissal was handled by Cabot, and that Cabot may have had a conflict of interest. Another law firm confirmed it was assembling a class action suit on behalf of past employees who believe they were denied fair internal hearings due to systemic favoritism and bias. Still, from Kristen Cabot herself, nothing. Her silence became its own headline. Publications speculated that she had negotiated a private severance package, possibly including a non-disclosure agreement. Some industry insiders claimed she had relocated to Oregon, where she had family. Others swore she was abroad. Regardless of her whereabouts, the woman who once walked the halls of Astronomer with such deliberate calm had become a ghost. A symbol of unchecked access, of proximity to power without checks or balances. And yet, to understand Kristen's downfall without acknowledging her contribution would be incomplete. For years, she was, by nearly all metrics, effective. She navigated a hyper-growth environment with a fraction of the resources other tech giants had. She built out compliance protocols, managed a distributed workforce, and helped the company transition to a remote-first model amid a global pandemic. Her fingerprints were on every department, every milestone. This duality, of building and betraying, made her story uniquely tragic. It also made her dangerous, because the kind of power Kristen wielded didn't come from a title, it came from trust. And when that trust eroded, so too did the scaffolding of Astronomer's image. It wasn't just a workplace scandal anymore. It was a philosophical collapse. What happens when the protector becomes the compromised? When the boundary keeper ignores the boundaries? When the one person everyone is supposed to run to is the one no one can run from? These questions haunted the company long after Kristen's departure. And they didn't just apply to her. They ricocheted throughout the tech world. Suddenly, conversations across Silicon Valley began to shift. Podcasts, newsletters, panels. They all began to ask whether HR departments could truly remain independent in a culture that still valorized founders and CEOs at any cost. Astronomer became a case study in every DEI summit, a cautionary tale in every startup ethics seminar. Inside the company, new HR leadership was quietly brought in under a veil of emergency transition. The new interim head of people sent a company-wide email pledging a return to transparent processes, open dialogue, and restored confidence. But it was met with skepticism. One longtime employee responded in private, "We've heard this before. What's different now?" The answer may lie not in policy or process, but in accountability. Kristen Cabot may never return to public life. She may never tell her side of the story, but her silence will remain one of the loudest echoes in this saga. A reminder that power in the workplace, once corrupted, rarely announces itself with thunder. It arrives quietly, elegantly, professionally, and by the time it's seen for what it is, the damage has already been done. It was meant to be an ordinary evening of music. No boardrooms, no investors, no data pipeline diagrams or executive check-ins. Just sound, lights, and thousands of people who came together for one shared purpose: to escape, if only for a couple of hours. But for Andy Byron and Kristen Cabot, that night at Gillette Stadium would not bring escape. It would bring exposure. The date was July 13th. Coldplay's Music of the Spheres tour had made its highly anticipated stop in Foxborough, Massachusetts. The stadium pulsed with excitement, and tickets had sold out weeks in advance. Among the 65,000 fans were families, teenagers on summer break, tech workers blowing off steam, and quietly nestled toward the middle of the West Side VIP section, Andy Byron and Kristen Cabot. At the time, no one knew who they were. Not the ushers, not the stage crew, and certainly not the fans seated around them. They were just another couple in a sea of strangers. Byron wore a baseball cap, low over his brow. Kristen's long auburn hair flowed over a simple linen jacket. Nothing about them suggested scandal. They blended in. Until the kiss cam changed that. The kiss cam is a long-running tradition at major sporting and music events. A lighthearted moment when the camera pans across couples, zooming in with playful hearts on the jumbotron, inviting them to share a brief, sweet kiss for the crowd. At most events, it's a moment of humor, sometimes awkwardness, and often applause. On this night, it would become a trigger. When the camera locked in on Andy and Kristen, they were caught mid-conversation. Kristen was laughing, leaning slightly into Andy. His hand was resting on the back of her seat. As their faces filled the jumbotron, something visibly shifted. Kristen's smile vanished. Her hand shot up to cover her face. Andy ducked down, as if trying to hide beneath her arm. It was a strange reaction, not one of surprise or shyness, but panic. The crowd chuckled. Some clapped. But the reaction that changed everything came not from the audience, but from the stage. Chris Martin, the frontman of Coldplay, noticed the moment. "Oh, look at these two," he joked casually through the mic, his voice amplified over the sea of fans. "All right, come on, you're okay." Then he paused, clearly responding to the couple's awkward attempt to shield themselves, and added, "Oh, what? Either they're having an affair, or they're just very shy." The audience roared with laughter. A perfect moment of spontaneous comedy. A throwaway line for most. But for Andy and Kristen, it was the opening of a wound that had been carefully stitched shut for years. That one sentence, unfiltered and unscripted, would become the most consequential line of the concert. Within hours, the video began appearing on TikTok. A fan had captured the kiss cam moment and Martin's joke from several rows back. The clip was grainy, but the faces were visible, at least to those who knew what to look for. At first, it circulated as harmless concert content. But the internet is quick, and the internet is ruthless. By morning, users had paused, enhanced, compared LinkedIn profile photos, and started naming names. "This guy looks like Andy Byron from Astronomer. Wait, isn't that the head of HR sitting next to him?" Threads spun out. One tweet that read, "That moment when the CEO of your company is caught in 4K having a secret relationship at a concert and the lead singer calls him out," amassed over 1.3 million views in 24 hours. Reddit users created side-by-side image comparisons, some even citing past conference appearances and company promo videos as reference. The tone of the conversation changed quickly. It went from curiosity to anger, from gossip to accusation. Because this wasn't just about two adults attending a concert. This was about workplace ethics, power imbalances, and the corrosive consequences of secrecy. Employees at Astronomer were some of the first to notice. Screenshots were exchanged via private signal threads. One internal message read, "Yo, is that who I think it is?" Another, more damning, simply said, "This is going to burn everything down." The public didn't know it yet, but the reaction inside Astronomer was a storm in real time. Executives convened early the next morning. PR teams scrambled to assess the situation. Legal counsel was brought into a hastily called Zoom session. Some board members, still unaware of the incident, were looped in after media inquiries started pouring in. One investor allegedly messaged the group chat with a single line, "Please tell me this is a joke." But it wasn't, and the worst was yet to come. Because Chris Martin's joke, accidental as it may have been, had pulled the lid off a scandal that had been quietly growing beneath the surface for years. What started as one video quickly turned into an internet sleuthing campaign. Fans dug deeper. TikTok detectives analyzed the couple's body language. "Look at how he ducks his head, classic guilt posture," one viral comment read. Others speculated how long the two had been involved, based on their visible comfort in the clip and their awkward yet practiced reaction to being caught. Then, other videos emerged. Different angles. Longer clips. One showed Byron whispering something to Kristen right after the camera panned away. Another caught him quickly checking his phone. A third captured Kristen visibly distressed, running a hand over her face as she looked down at the ground. It was a timeline in pieces, but it was damning. The media frenzy exploded. Within 48 hours, outlets like The Verge, Business Insider, and TechCrunch had published stories referencing a viral concert moment involving top executives from a prominent data company. None named Byron directly, at first. But internet culture is not restrained by journalistic guidelines. By the end of the week, his name was trending on X. Kristen's name, once obscure, was now front and center in every speculative thread. And what made it worse? Neither of them denied it. In fact, they said nothing at all. That silence only deepened the damage. Employees demanded answers. Some emailed HR, only to receive automatic replies. Others turned to leadership, but their questions were deflected with cold, impersonal phrases. We are evaluating the situation, and we remain committed to maintaining a positive workplace environment. No one believed it, especially not after Byron failed to appear at the following week's all-hands meeting. Instead, a prepared statement was read aloud by the company's chief legal officer. It was clinical, hollow, designed to say nothing while implying everything. And yet, it was the absence of Byron and Cabot that spoke the loudest. They had vanished, at least publicly. Internally, however, the clock had started ticking. Because what the world didn't yet know was that the kiss cam footage didn't just catch them off guard. It triggered a chain reaction within Astronomer's walls. A reckoning. And as the company scrambled to do damage control, the question everyone was afraid to ask started echoing louder. Was Kristen the only one? Inside Astronomer's Mountain View headquarters, a different kind of storm was brewing. Employees weren't just processing shock. They were questioning everything. The kiss cam video had exposed something more than an inappropriate relationship. It had revealed a hidden language of favoritism and quiet complicity that many had long suspected but could never confirm. For the first time, the unspoken was spoken aloud. Junior engineers began to piece together timelines. Some remembered sudden promotions. Others remembered HR decisions that made little sense at the time, but now seemed glaringly suspicious. One former senior project manager privately compiled a spreadsheet of past personnel changes. Among the patterns he noticed were a series of abrupt exits over a 3-year period. Departures that were never explained, all involving women in departments that had reported directly to Kristen or had frequent interactions with Andy. Within the week, 2 anonymous emails landed in the inbox of the board's oversight committee. Both were signed only with the initials LP and SH. Each claimed to have had direct knowledge of a cozy relationship between Byron and Cabot dating back at least 4 years. One alleged that a female product designer had raised concerns internally about preferential treatment involving travel expenses and project assignments, only to resign months later, citing a loss of faith in leadership in her exit interview. That file, as it turns out, had been closed by none other than Kristen Cabot. Now, with the video public and attention swirling, nothing could be buried. And then came the voice recordings. Late on a Thursday evening, a well-known tech culture blogger uploaded audio snippets to a Substack newsletter. They claimed to have received the clips from a verified internal source at Astronomer. One clip featured Andy Byron on a video call, speaking with what sounded like another executive. The context was ambiguous, but the tone was striking. It's just easier when she's in the room, Byron says in the clip. She gets it. She knows what I need before I say it. There's no friction. That's the value. And, well, that kind of loyalty, you can't find that often. The she was never named, but readers assumed Kristen. The implications, though, were less about flirtation and more about manipulation. Was Kristen promoted for her loyalty rather than her merit? Was her proximity to power part of an unspoken agreement, a mutual exchange of influence and protection? Then came a second clip. This time, Byron is overheard in a moment of frustration, complaining about staff pushback on new performance metrics. I don't care what they think, he says. Let Kristen handle it. That's what she's there for. Taken on their own, the clips were inconclusive. But in the broader context of the scandal, they took on new meaning. The image of Byron and Cabot as professional partners was rapidly disintegrating. In its place stood the portrait of a leadership duo who had consolidated power in ways that escaped scrutiny for far too long. And then, just as media coverage was reaching a fever pitch, Chris Martin spoke again. During another stop on the Coldplay tour, this time in Chicago, Martin took a moment to address the thing that happened at our last show. With visible discomfort, he paused between songs to say, "Sometimes we say something spontaneous on stage, not knowing what it might stir up. I made a joke about a couple on the kiss cam. I didn't know who they were. I still don't. But if my comment caused trouble, I sincerely apologize. It was never my intention. The apology was quiet, almost reluctant, but it reignited interest in the scandal. News outlets ran headlines. Chris Martin addresses viral kisscam fallout, and Coldplay frontman weighs in on tech CEO drama. While Martin's words were meant to distance himself from the consequences, they inadvertently validated the magnitude of what had happened. This wasn't just internet drama. It was a cultural touchpoint, a rare moment when the intersection of tech, power, ethics, and celebrity converged on a single stage and left a crater. Back at Astronomer, tensions continued to escalate. Internally, employees demanded a town hall. When leadership agreed, it was scheduled with short notice and only allowed questions submitted in advance. Byron was expected to appear. Instead, what employees got was a stilted, pre-recorded video of him delivering a short statement. He didn't deny the relationship. He didn't apologize. He didn't even mention Kristen by name. "I understand the recent attention may have created concern among our team," he said. "Let me assure you that I remain committed to the values of Astronomer and to the continued success of this company." What happened at the concert was a personal moment, but I take full responsibility for any impact it may have had on this organization. We are reviewing all aspects of our leadership practices and HR protocols. Thank you. The message landed like a dead weight. It felt rehearsed, sterile, insincere. More tellingly, it was immediately followed by a Slack message from the company's general counsel reminding employees not to discuss ongoing internal reviews publicly. But then came the slip. During a closed-door follow-up session, with senior management present and fewer filters in place, Byron reportedly responded to a tense question from a director of engineering with an offhand remark. "She wasn't the only one who mattered to me." A recording of that moment was leaked less than 24 hours later. It went viral instantly. She wasn't the only one. The internet seized on those words with the fury of a swarm. What did he mean? Was it an admission of more relationships? A defense of his actions? A diversion? TikTok creators posted reaction videos analyzing his tone, posture, and word choice. Some said it sounded like regret. Others heard a veiled threat. Still others argued that it was confirmation that Kristen Cabot was just one piece in a larger web of inappropriate entanglements. In Reddit threads, former and current employees began comparing notes. A few names popped up again and again. A former assistant who left suddenly in 2018. A mid-level marketing manager whose team was dissolved without warning. A senior technical recruiter who had moved across the country for a promised promotion that never materialized, and then disappeared from the company months later. Each story alone didn't prove anything. But together, they raised one unavoidable question. Was Kristen really the only one? The kiss cam moment may have exposed a secret relationship, but Byron's cryptic remark hinted at something far deeper, far darker. It suggested a pattern. And patterns, unlike scandals, don't fade. They build, they connect, and they demand answers. Astronomer had spent nearly a decade building a reputation for precision. In an industry defined by volatility, misfires, and overpromises, the company had stood out for its discipline. Its systems worked. Its engineers delivered. Its public face, Andy Byron, never courted controversy, never gave unnecessary interviews, never raised his voice or made splashy moves. Astronomer had been the embodiment of controlled growth and quiet competence. But all of that unraveled in mere days after the Coldplay incident. And when the scandal broke into the open, what followed was not the calculated damage control of a well-oiled corporate machine. It was panic. The first sign that the leadership had lost its grip was the delay. For nearly 48 hours after the kisscam video exploded across social media, Astronomer remained silent. Not a single official post. No press statement. Not even an internal memo. In that vacuum, speculation metastasized. Employees scoured each other's LinkedIn activity. Some tried to interpret the silence as strategic. Perhaps legal counsel was preparing a tight, bulletproof response. Others saw it for what it was, chaos. Inside the company's headquarters, a flurry of closed-door meetings had already begun. Byron, according to insiders, refused to step down or take a leave of absence. He allegedly insisted the issue was personal and not a breach of any documented policy. His inner circle tried to calm the board, but the board, now under pressure from investors and outside press, was no longer willing to be soothed by generic reassurances. On the third day, an internal email was finally sent to staff. The message, signed by the company's chief operations officer, was the kind of sterile corporate communique that did more harm than good. It acknowledged the circulating media surrounding certain leadership figures and confirmed that appropriate steps are being taken to ensure workplace culture remains safe and consistent with Astronomer's values. Nowhere in the email were Byron or Cabot mentioned by name. There was no apology, no accountability, and certainly no clarity. Employees, most of whom had already seen the video, read the memo with quiet rage. One engineer shared a screenshot with the caption, "We get more transparency from a YouTube algorithm update." That day, several employees walked out of an internal sync call in silent protest. By end of week, a group of mid-level managers, spanning engineering, sales, and marketing, drafted a formal letter demanding answers. The letter, signed anonymously but representing a coalition of over 30 employees, asked 3 direct questions. Was there an undisclosed romantic relationship between Andy Byron and Kristen Cabot? If so, what steps had been taken to ensure that power dynamics did not compromise hiring, promotion, or performance decisions? Would the board commit to an independent, third-party investigation into potential ethical violations? The letter was sent to the board, the legal team, and HR, all of whom issued no reply. Instead, Astronomer's executive team opted for a public relations strategy built around silence and diversion. The company's social media pages posted a string of pre-scheduled product announcements. Blog posts touted customer success stories. A webinar on Airflow's new integrations went ahead as planned, though viewership was cut in half. Comments on YouTube and LinkedIn were disabled. Anyone asking questions in the public Discord channel was warned or banned. Internally, however, the pressure was only building. The real shift came when a single executive broke ranks. Her name was Mallory Sharp, VP of Customer Strategy, and one of the few female executives not directly aligned with Byron or Cabot. She had joined Astronomer 3 years earlier after a stint at Snowflake, and had quickly earned a reputation for no-nonsense communication and unflinching leadership. On a Friday morning, during a scheduled AMA session with her department, Sharp was asked a direct question by a junior client manager. "Do you believe the leadership has handled the KissCam situation ethically?" There was a pause. Then she responded, "I think ethics start with honesty. And I think we failed on that front." Her words were clipped, measured, but they detonated like a bomb. By mid-afternoon, snippets of the AMA were circulating on internal channels. By that evening, Sharp's quote had reached a journalist at The Information. That same night, the publication ran a short but piercing headline: "Astronomer VP breaks silence on leadership scandal." By the next morning, the story had been picked up by TechCrunch, Insider, and Axios. For the first time, the walls of enforced silence cracked. And where cracks appear, leaks follow. A former recruiting coordinator shared anonymously that Kristen had personally vetoed the hire of an engineer who had previously worked under another executive Cabot disliked. Another employee claimed that Byron and Cabot had co-authored the company's internal HR grievance escalation document, an alarming revelation, given that it was meant to function as a safeguard against executive overreach. Perhaps most damning was a series of internal expense reports leaked to the press. These showed that Cabot and Byron had billed the company for joint travel expenses on multiple occasions, often under ambiguous pretexts. One trip to Austin was filed under Workforce Retention Conference, though no such event was ever located in public calendars. Another trip to Vancouver was logged as Partner Expansion Strategy Retreat. Multiple employees from the partnerships team confirmed they were never invited. And then came the employee surveys. Just 6 months earlier, Astronomer had conducted an internal satisfaction survey through a third-party vendor. The results had been largely positive, though one section on confidence in leadership integrity scored notably lower than the others. At the time, the company's comms team spun the dip as a reflection of post-pandemic trust rebuilding. Now, employees demanded to see the raw data. When it wasn't released, several anonymous staffers launched their own pulse survey using Google Forms. Within 48 hours, over 100 responses came in. Question: Do you believe the CEO and head of HR engaged in an inappropriate relationship that compromised company integrity? Answer breakdown. Yes, 78%. Unsure but concerned, 15%. No, 7%. The numbers were clear. The trust was gone.